This evening we have lots of ground to cover, and we want to tailor it as much as possible to folks' interests and desires. So we have 4 main sections about planning. And the next slide will go into a little bit more detail. Planning what you may do and how to do it. And then we have built in a slide with a break for questions. So if on the way through something occurs to you but you don't get it asked in the course, we will have a break for questions after each of these sections. Unfortunately, there are many slides, so I will probably go fairly rapidly over many of them. But if you would like clarification, please sing out and let us know, and we'll be happy to try to answer your questions. So, general context of Vermont planning. Vermont's a Dillon's rule state, which is, a lot of folks think it's a home rule state, but it's not. In Vermont, towns can only do things that are specifically enabled by statute, and in doing them, if you choose to do them, you must do them as specified by the statute. That particular statute is 24 VSA Chapter 117, Sections 4301 to 4498, known as Municipal and Regional Planning and Development Act. 3 elements of land use planning are the statute that authorizes plans and implementation, and then the plans themselves and the implementation tools to make the plans do what you hope they will do. So what is a plan? It's essentially a community's vision and guides growth and development in the town. It's an inclusive process, and it empowers the community to respond to changes and gives communities a means to designate where they want various forms of conservation or development, and also to indicate where they want things to stay as they are or to evolve over time or transform more quickly. With a current plan, a town can adopt and amend zoning, subdivision, and flood hazard area land use regulations. If you don't have a town plan, you can't adopt or amend them. If you have a plan, Act 250 permits can only be issued if the proposed project conforms with the town plan. And in Section 248 proceedings for Public Utilities Commission now, for energy generation or transmission facilities, town plan is given due consideration, or if you have an enhanced energy plan, you may actually achieve substantial deference. And an approved plan meets, and we'll get to what approved actually means later, meets eligibility requirements for grants like municipal planning grants and state designations. The planning process, circular, iterative, and I'm not going to read every box on the slide. I think we might have failed to mention that we should be making a slide deck available so that you can peruse this at your leisure. But basically, you create a plan, adopt a plan, try to implement it, and then evaluate how it's been doing, and then update it. So the planning process in Vermont is governed by state planning goals. There are 4 process goals on how you, what the state would like to see happen as you plan, how to plan, and 14 very specific substantive goals on what your planning should be achieving. The process goals are on the screen: establish a coordinated comprehensive planning process, encourage citizen participation, consider use of resources and consequences of growth and development, and encourage and assist towns to work creatively together. The 14 specific state planning goals take many pages of statute to spell out, but they're sort of summarized with these little circles. And we can get into more detail about them if you like as we go. One of the process goals being citizen participation. This is a little explanation of different means of encouraging citizen participation. Inform folks using fact sheets, newsletters, websites, consult with folks via surveys and public meetings, or involve people in workshops and focus groups, and collaborate with partners in the form of citizen advisory committees or charrettes, participatory decision-making. It's your town plan, and you can say pretty much a lot of what you want, but there are 12 required elements that you have to, every town plan has to have. I'm not going to read through them all, but they include statement of objectives, land use, transportation, utility facilities, and so on. This is the order they are in statute. It is evident from looking at them that the legislature has added things on, because after number 7, program for implementation, then we have new additions: energy plan and housing and economic development and flood resilience. So just an observation. Municipal plan adoption. Plans expire every 8 years. Used to be 5 years until July 1, 2015. The adoption process, well, so you want to try to work on adopting or updating or readopting your plan before it expires. And the second major listing of points is why you want to get an early start on it. And we recommend that you try to start not less than 2 years before the expiration date, because the requirements for the adoption process include planning commission hearing, and you have to distribute a bunch of information to a bunch of folks, including adjoining towns and the regional commission and the state, 30 days in advance of your first planning commission hearing. Then the select board has to have hearing, at least one, and there's a time frame for select board hearings, not less than 30 days after the planning commission submits a draft plan to them. And then the decision on adoption, the default is that the select board adopts a plan, but the select board or the voters may choose to have the vote go to adoption by Australian ballot, and plans go into effect on adoption. And here's the promised later discussion about approval of the plan. Towns may request, they don't have to, our regional planning commission approval of the town plan and confirmation of the municipal planning process. There are statutory requirements that if the plan meets them, the regional planning commission shall approve it. And I'm not going to read them all, but there they are. And similarly, the Regional Planning Commission shall confirm the municipal planning process if a town is engaged in the continuing planning process and trying to implement the plan and is supportive of municipal and regional planning. So, quick run through a raft of slides. Be happy to entertain questions and stop talking for a second. But don't know whether anyone has raised their hand or has a question.
So, oh, I'm sorry. I don't see any raised hands currently, and there's nothing in the chat, but it sounds like we do have someone who wants to jump in with a question.
Yes, sorry, I didn't know how to raise my hand. This is Soraya.
Hi, Soraya.
Hi, I'm on the Westminster Planning Commission. I was just wondering, do you have like a calendar that works back from the, the adoption date with all these kind of processes?
Well,
retroactively, so we can kind of use that as a guideline for when things need to happen. Does that exist?
well, I'm not aware of one that exists in precisely that form. There are a number of tools available. There's a plan and bylaw adoption tool that I believe, have on our website, and it certainly is available from DHCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, on their site, and which, if you just send us a request, we can email to you, that lays out all the required steps in adoption of a plan. And then you can work backwards using that from when your plan expires. So if it expires in December, then you want to make sure that you get it to a vote, say it would be ideal in November. And that has to happen after a select board hearing, which has to happen 30 days after the Planning Commission gives the plan to the select board to consider. And that happens after the Planning Commission hearing, and it has to be distributed to adjoining towns in the state 30 days before that hearing. So there isn't a easy, clear-cut calendar available, but we'll be happy to work through it with you.
Great, thank you very much.
So we do have a couple hands raised. I think Jethro Eden from Guilford had his hand raised first, so we'll go there.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I have poor connection, so I'm just on the audio. Everyone hear me? Hello?
You're breaking up a little bit, Jethro, but we might be able to get your question.
Try.
Well, I appreciate you guys doing this. It's very helpful. I think I might just have to listen in. Maybe I could, if I have a question, I can try to just send it through the chat.
That might work better, and I can certainly, I'm monitoring the chat, Jethro, so if you do type it into the chat, I can share that and make sure that John hears it.
And just as a default,
Jethro, you're breaking up quite a lot. So I think maybe the best thing to do is for you to type it into chat, and maybe while we're waiting for that, Jethro, I'm going to move to Shelley. She had her hand raised.
all right, but before Shelley starts, let me just say in response to Jethro, if for some reason we experience technical difficulties this evening, feel free to reach out by telephone or email to us directly. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, John. This is Shelley from the town of Newfane.
Yep. Hi, Shelley.
I think we met on a approval of the town plan.
I believe so.
Yes.
And you're a new commissioner. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
A new commissioner, Windham Regional Commission, so,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. So I know we have a town plan, but do most of the towns have their own town plans?
Most towns do. I think, in our region, I think we have 24 towns that have town plans, and in fact, even, well, I don't think all of them are approved at this point. We have a couple towns that have expired plans, and they've run afoul of the pandemic in the adoption process. But as we may get to a little bit later, the legislature passed Act 92 that put a stay on the expiration of town plans for the length of the executive order 01-20. So anyway,
And,
so most towns do have them.
that's good, okay. I believe ours is approved. I think we had,
I believe so, yep.
we kind of passed with flying colors, I think. So it was a question. Thank you very much.
Oh, pleasure.
So I don't see any more hands raised at this moment. So
All righty, well,
maybe
I'm
we go
happy
into the
to,
next section.
happy to progress. The local roles and responsibility, who does what and when and how. So very briefly, and this isn't as clear as it might be, but it would take a much larger slide. There's sort of three functions: a legislative, a quasi-judicial, and administrative functions contemplated in the statute. Legislative function is to write and adopt plans, bylaws, and those sort of things. Quasi-judicial is implementing those by way of so-called appropriate municipal panels, Planning Commission and Zoning Board of Adjustment, or a Planning Commission and a DRB. And then there's the administrative function of issuing or denying permits. So legislative body is select board. Then there is the administrative function, the zoning administrator. There's also a legislative function for the Planning Commission as they draft plans or bylaws. And then under the quasi-judicial aspect, you have either Zoning Board of Adjustment and Planning Commission, or a DRB performing all the functions that both of those other boards would otherwise perform. So Planning Commission prepares the town plan, prepares zoning and other regulations. They can prepare or edit a capital budget and program, or prepare other studies. A select board is critically important because they review and may edit the municipal plan, and then they either adopt it or reject it, but that doesn't happen very often. But a lot of times there's editing and then adoption. Or if the town's voted to do it by Australian ballot, it goes to the voters. Similarly, the select board is who adopts land use regulations, unless the town has opted to have them adopted by the voters. And the select board is who adopts the capital budget and program. The Planning Commission can prepare one, edit one, but it's the select board that adopts. The quasi-judicial functions, the Development Review Board, if there is one, they do it all: site plan, subdivision, conditional use, lots without frontage variances, and et cetera. The original setup was a Planning Commission and a Zoning Board of Adjustment, and the sort of de facto division of labor there was that the Planning Commission did site plan, subdivisions, and lots without frontage, and ZBAs did conditional uses, variances, or appeals. The administrative function, the zoning administrator, issues or denies zoning permits, conducts enforcement. A very important role is assisting applicants, and another very important role is providing staff support for Planning Commission, DRB, or Zoning Board of Adjustment. That's our quick run through those guys.
John, we do have a couple questions that actually did come up related to the first section. There might be
Yep.
more that relate to this section. I'm going to read them
Yep.
from the chat. This question is from Sarah Shippey. The question is a town limited to adopting a new revised town plan every 8 years? Can it be reviewed and updated more frequently?
Absolutely can be updated much more frequently. In fact, towns are encouraged to take a look at plans and update them as the situation warrants, as things change or as new information becomes available. So absolutely do not have to wait for the 8-year clock to run to update or adopt an updated plan.
Sarah also has her hand raised. Sarah, did you have an additional question?
No, I was just trying to draw attention to the question I put in the chat.
Okay.
All
So
right.
we also have a question from William Shakespeare. What happens if your plan is expired before the new plan has been completed?
Then you are without a plan, and you cannot adopt or amend zoning, and you will not be eligible for things like municipal planning grants or village center designation from the state. So it's a really good idea to try to adopt your updated plan before your plan expires. I happen to know that Marlboro's plan has been expired for longer than Marlboro would like. Let me put it that way.
That is correct, John. Thank you. We're working on it. It should be done pretty soon.
I devoutly hope so. And please reach out. I'd be really happy to try to help. I would love to take a quick look at it and offer possible suggestions. But anyway, I know you guys have been working on it a long time. And
Wrapping up, we got the energy piece and mapping, but we should be in touch with you pretty soon to get this wrapped up.
all right. Looking forward to it, Will.
Great, thanks.
And thank you and welcome aboard, new commissioner from Marlboro.
Thank you. Going to learn a little bit today and going to need to learn a lot more.
Well, don't hesitate to reach out with questions.
Okay, will do. Thanks.
So there is a question and comment from Jethro Eaton. Guilford's is also expired. How do we get participation during COVID-19?
So 2 questions there. And one is that I actually believe that Act 92 was passed by the legislature before your plan expired. And Act 92 put a stay on expiration of town plans for the length of Executive Order 01-20, and then there's a 90-day grace period after the end of the executive order declaring a state of emergency. So I think it's worth pursuing to be absolutely certain, but it's my suspicion and strong belief that Guilford's plan that would have expired, I think, in June, is still valid and will still be valid until the expiration of the executive order, and I think the 90-day grace period thereafter. The second part of the question was how to proceed while we're in this pandemic situation, and part of the legislation enabled towns to to do virtual meetings, and we will get to this a little bit later in the show, but essentially there used to be a statutory requirement that if you were going to try to do a virtual meeting, you had to have a physical location at which the public could participate, and you had to have a board member or staff person at that location. and that is also on hold for the length of the executive order. One final just note on this, I think I've got it touched on later, but Vermont League of Cities and Towns just did a webinar today on planning under open meeting law under COVID-19. We would have been really happy to push that information out, but we didn't know about it until I discovered it today when I was checking links for later on in the slideshow.
Just one further comment from Jethro saying that virtual meetings are almost impossible with his board at this time.
I can believe that they are difficult, absolutely. I think that's one of the reasons that there was that stay on the expiration. In fact, I think Guilford was part of the impetus behind that particular aspect of the legislation. Any more questions?
I'm not seeing any raised hands or questions right now in the.
Alrighty, well then I shall forge ahead, mindful of the fact that we have a number of slides and a limited amount of time. So implementing your plan, there are sort of two means: regulatory implementation through zoning and subdivision, flood hazard bylaws, and ordinances, or non-regulatory implementation, which can include a number of things, including improving public facilities and engaging citizens and coming up with additional plans like an open space plan or a conservation plan that could be used to try to encourage activities in the town plan. This slide came out of questions brought up in prior iterations of this workshop. What's the difference between a bylaw and an ordinance? They can have very similar impacts, but they're adopted differently and may be enforced differently. The bylaws and tools authorized under statute and enforced pursuant to Chapter 117 include zoning, subdivision, and other regulations. Other regulations can include flood hazard area regulations, but those can also be adopted under Chapter 59 as an ordinance. The adoption procedure there is very different, rather than under Chapter 117, where bylaws have to have planning commission hearing and select board hearing, and then adoption. Under Chapter 59, the select board has a hearing and can adopt, and the citizens' recourse is to petition for a vote to overturn the adoption. And ordinances can be enforced under Judicial Bureau or in Superior Court or under Chapter 117. So why have local land use regulations? Well, to, in part at least, implement the vision and goals of the town plan. And I'm not going to read all of them, but they're admirable goals, and these ones in particular reflect in large part the statutory planning goals. There are limits on land use regulations. Remembering that Vermont is Dillon's rule of state, so you can only regulate what is enabled, and regulations must comply with two particular sections about required provisions and prohibited effects. and limitations on municipal bylaws. And you can tell people what they can and cannot do with their land, but not deprive them of all reasonable use of their property.
John?
Players and processes potentially involved. When someone submits an application, zoning administrator receives it and determines if it's complete, and then may be able to permit it themselves, or it may need to go to a quasi-judicial board for review and conditions. In either case, there are opportunities for appeal of the decision, and we'll hit that in a minute. Local regulations, the types of review,
John,
the development.
before we go on to that, we do have a question.
Yep.
So the question is, our planning commission, so this is from Tabby Friedman from Dover. Our
Yep.
planning commission is not functional right now. We can get more people who want to staff it, but am I, as the zoning administrator, allowed to be on the planning commission, or would I only be in an advisory position? Our previous head of planning commission has retired.
So my quick response to this is, rats, I'm not technologically capable of going into statute and finding the section and reading it to you right now. There is a section in statute about membership on planning commissions, and I don't know that there's a prohibition on a zoning administrator serving on a planning commission, but there could well be. I'll be honest, I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I know that I can't think of a planning commission that has a zoning administrator as a voting member of the commission. But most planning commissions are in extremely close contact with zoning administrators, so that they can advise a zoning administrator on what intentions were with a piece of regulation, and so that they can hear what issues arise in the actual implementation of the regulation, so that they can adjust it going forward, amend it going forward to make it work better. So sorry I don't have the clear answer right this second. If we manage to note it down, can ZA serve on PC? We'll try to get an answer to you. That's all I've got on that.
All right, John, I think we're ready to go on.
All righty. So, local regulation types of review. Land development, in this definition, the definition in Act 250 is about 2.5 pages of statute. This summarizes it rather succinctly, what it is, and the purposes of the various types of review are permitted uses allowed by right if they meet requirements. Conditional uses may be allowed if they meet standards spelled out in the bylaw. Site plan review, similarly approval. Variances, there are 5 extremely stringent conditions that must be met for a variance to be granted, and the legislature, in response to the fact that many towns were issuing variances that were arguably not meeting all those standards, ended up implementing a provision for dimensional waivers so that towns could have some flexibility in modifying dimensional standards for good reason. Planned unit development allows for much modification of development standards so that you can have clustered development, compact development, and leave larger areas, open space, and protect natural resources and other attributes. And subdivisions essentially can control the pattern of future development depending on how extensive the standards are. Regulatory decisions, those quasi-judicial function boards have to issue decisions, and there are requirements in statute about they have to be in writing. They have to include a statement of factual basis on which the decision was made and a statement of the conclusions. They have to be based on review standards in the bylaw. Minutes may suffice if they contain all the necessary information above. The timeline for issuing decisions, the board has to issue a decision within 45 days after the adjournment of the hearing. A number of towns seem to have been confused by statute and have spelled out similar kind of requirement in their own bylaws, and sometimes they've been erroneous and based it on from the date the application was received and gotten themselves tied in knots. So that's something to pay attention to. Decision is after the adjournment of the hearing. Then if it hasn't been issued, it's deemed approved on the 46th day. The decision does not need to be made the day of the hearing. You can have your hearing and close it and then meet later for a deliberative session, but you have to issue your decision within 45 days of the date of the close of hearing. Ooh, how's that for in the weeds? So appeals of decisions can be made. They're either at local or state level, as the slide shows. Appeals of the ZA or AO goes to the DRB or the Zoning Board of Adjustment. Decisions of boards are appealed to Environmental Court. Interested persons may appeal. There is a quite lengthy section of statute which defines who an interested person is, and there's a summary of who they are. Only interested persons who've participated in a hearing can appeal a decision of a board, and the municipal board does not have to make the determination of who's an interested person. They can leave that to the environmental court. Non-regulatory implementation, capital budget and program. I'm not going to read them all. I'm going to take a sip of water just a sec. Much better. So meetings and hearings and what happens. There's often some lack of clarity about meetings and hearings. Meetings are public gatherings of public bodies. Legislative hearings are hearings specifically aimed at the preparation or adoption of a plan or a bylaw, and those are held by Planning Commission and Select Board. And the quasi-judicial hearings are reviewing applications that involve conditional use or site plan or whatever else the regulation may specify needs to be reviewed, and those are held by the board.
John,
right.
we do have a question from the chat.
Oh, good. I'm tired of talking.
Well, you got to answer the question. So,
Well, I'll try.
all right. So the question is from Jethro Eaton. He's wondering if you have thoughts or concerns about towns that don't have zoning.
Oh boy, there's a live wire. Thank you, Jethro. I will try to speak carefully, not too evasively. I think that land use regulation, zoning in particular, can be very useful for towns to try to guide growth and preserve things in their towns. And they can be particularly useful in protecting not only resources, but people and infrastructure in terms of things like flood hazard area regulations. That having been said, we have, pretty sure in the Windham region, at least 7 towns that don't have land use regulation. But it's something we're very happy to try to work with towns to pursue if they're interested. How's that for delicate elocution? Any more?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat or raised hands, but feel free
All
to
right.
jump in with anybody if you have something quickly.
We'll try to.
Oh, we
Take
do
a-
have a raised hand from Shelley.
All right, Shelley.
So we have a plan, and I don't really even know if they're looking to implement this plan. You know, I have some ideas of what I'd like to do. I got to look at the plan, but it's really about getting a group of people together, correct, to make a project, and then
Well,
apply.
for example, Newfane's plan, the last iteration of it included the desire to seek village center designation for Newfane and Williamsville and South Newfane. And so that did come to fruition. So there has been implementation of the Newfane plan. That's an example of it.
Okay. But also if you have a larger plan of, you know, if you wanted to have different areas like a development, you know, for senior citizens and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You'd have to take a look at the town plan. Would they, right off the top of my head, I can't recall, but would they make certain areas in the plan or in the town restricted to that type of growth?
Well, certainly a town plan could propose an area for more dense residential development or for affordable housing or for senior housing. The land use element could certainly propose such.
Okay. But it takes, it would start with a group of people, not necessarily the town making that decision.
Well, in terms of making it come to fruition, that usually happens with a bunch of enthused and involved citizens. But it cannot hurt for the town plan to articulate for it. So if you're updating a plan, you put that in a plan, then you can point to that in grant applications for funding or so on.
So if there isn't an area specified, then to update it would probably be the best thing to do if you're planning to do a senior residence.
It would probably be a good idea to contemplate doing that.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, any more questions before we push on towards
There's nothing
open meeting
currently.
law?
Yeah. I think
Oh,
we're
hello.
ready to move on.
All right. So open meeting law governs meetings of public bodies. And there's a tremendous amount of good and useful information at the VLCT website. There's a link to it at the bottom of the page. They have prepared a number of very useful documents, and we'll get into some more of them in a little bit. But the basic requirements of the open meeting law, you have to post notice of meeting in advance. You have to make the agenda available before the meeting in a number of places. You have to let the public participate in meetings, and you have to make the minutes available within 5 days after the meeting, and that's 5 calendar days. So there is a possible exception to that under COVID-19. The executive order, while it's in effect, if there's a staffing problem, a town may take up to 10 calendar days to make the minutes available. So this slide is, well, it's a work in progress because things change rapidly, but there were the changes to address the pandemic made under Executive Order 120, and I believe it's up to maybe 18 or 19 amendments thereto, or addenda thereto, and then there are even amendments to the addenda. Anyway, the open meeting law changes provide for virtual meetings and eliminate the physical location and staffing it requirement. In Chapter 117, there's a stay of expiration deadline, such as a town plan expiration, and towns are granted the ability to grant extensions for expiring permits and licenses. And to give kudos to Vermont League of Cities and Towns again, they have a very useful COVID-19 page that includes frequently asked questions document and a bunch of other information. I highly encourage folks to visit VLCT's COVID-19 page. They have a toolkit for remote meetings. They have all sorts of resources there. And here's a slide just updated today. They recorded the webinar on the open meeting law compliance amid COVID-19 that they held today. So that should be available. So public notice requirements for meetings. For regular meetings, at least 48 hours in or near the town office and 2 other designated places. For legislative hearings, for preparation and adoption of plans, that's 15 days for plans and bylaws, and for quasi-judicial hearings, 7 or 15 days, depending on the subject matter. I think for site plan, it's only 7 days, but for most other development review, it's 15 days. The flow of a quasi-judicial public hearing.
John, before you
Yep.
Jump into this slide, we had a question from Jethro Eaton. So he asked, so can we meet without a full board during COVID?
You don't have a meeting if you don't have a quorum of the board. That has to be a majority of the seats on the board. So if you have a 7-person board, you have to have at least 4 people meeting. They don't all have to be in the same place. You can do it by remote, but you do have to have a quorum. And that was actually addressed very specifically in that hearing, in that webinar earlier this afternoon. And if I could minimize, I could pull it up, but I can't, so I won't. Another question, or shall I forge ahead?
I would forge ahead. And
All right. So, and if people have questions, you don't have to feel that tonight is the only bite at the apple. By all means, call or email with questions. We'll be happy to try to answer them. So the flow of a hearing, I don't know that I need to read each of the steps, but open the hearing, have a presentation on the proposal, board members ask questions. When they're finished asking questions, or largely so, then solicit comments from interested parties in the public. And then the chair closes the public hearing and opens deliberations. They can be public or private. And then the board decides and issues a written decision. Opening a quasi-judicial hearing steps. It's a good idea to review the order of events, remind participants of the importance of order, and you should have copies of rules of procedure and ethics policies, and it doesn't hurt to have a copy or two available. You can review the definition of interested persons and ensure documentation of participants. And I don't know about administer oath. This presentation had a number of cooks stirring the broth, and I'm not going to vouch for that one about administering an oath. I can find an answer if anyone wants. And then request disclosure of conflicts of interest or ex parte communications. That is an important thing to do. The role of a board chair: administer the agenda, try to keep people focused, and ensure that the board finishes on time. State the question, ask for discussion, and bring the board to resolution after the discussion. The board members' rules: listen to testimony and evidence, ask questions, make sure you know what you're talking about in terms of your regulations, avoid conflicts of interest, and base decision on evidence presented, and don't prejudge things. Deliberative session. So this is after the board has closed its hearing. It can close a hearing and continue to discuss the matter in a public meeting, or it can have a deliberative session. It's exempt from the open meeting law. And these are often used when there's a particularly contentious issue that the board is grappling with.
John, we had a question arise
Yeah.
about roles, and
Yeah.
Jethro Eaton asked, what is the role of the vice chair?
The role of the vice chair would be to chair if the chair is not there, in short, or to provide assistance to the chair. The primary, I think, responsibility is to be there to take the helm if for some reason the chair is not able to. Maybe can't make it to a meeting, or has a conflict of interest and has to recuse him or herself. Then the chair would be the next one up on the firing line. Don't mean to be flippant, but anyway. More questions? Nope. Okay. conflict of interest. It can be financial or personal. And it's important to try to avoid problems with conflicts of interest. And if there's a question, the person in question might be well advised to recuse themselves so that they don't cause difficulties for the board or the procedure. Managing conflicts. Adopt rules of procedure and ethics policies. And you're actually supposed to do this. There's, in statute, you're supposed to adopt rules of procedure and ethics policies. Rules of procedure, a lot of folks say, oh yeah, Robert's rules, we follow them. Almost invariably not the case. Robert's rules is, I think it's 220 some pages, and most of that pertains to extremely large bodies like Parliament, and does not have much to say about extremely small board procedures like planning commissions with 3 or 5 members. Ex parte communication is difficult to avoid, so always want to disclose it and recuse yourself when necessary. So, in summary, protecting due process. Provide proper public notice, give people an opportunity to be heard, conduct orderly proceeding, ensure proper management of evidence. And this is where the zoning administrator may have a very valuable role in terms of keeping track of all the paperwork, applications, and plans, and decisions, and appropriate management of conflicts of interest. So, places you can learn more stuff about planning. The VPIC, Vermont Planning Information Center, vpic.info, has a lot of information. Oh, and there's the plan and bylaw adoption tool that I mentioned. That applies for both town plans and for bylaws, and it lays out step by step the statutory requirements. It's actually laid out in a form that has led some people to believe that it's a requirement for town clerks. It's not, but it's laid out to enable a town clerk to provide a certificate saying that the plan or bylaw was adopted properly and all legal requirements were met.
I just want to point out that I did provide a link. It was the first link I provided in the everyone chat to the plan and bylaw adoption tools.
Oh, good. Thank you. And there's a rules of procedure and ethics manual. And I believe VLCT also has model rules of procedure and ethics manual on their site. So tools and resources available. The most valuable one in my book is the legislature, the statutes, the actual law, because when you get to questions, just go to the law and read it, is the best way to get a clear answer, or try to. Then you can call us and we can debate what it means, but we'll be happy to try to help you figure it out. And VLCT, great asset. They have tons of good information. The Department of Housing and Community Development, likewise, if you can borrow into their website successfully, you can get to a lot of good information. I think they have a link to the statute there, among other things. There's my contact information. Don't hesitate to give a call or shoot an email. Although working remotely, I do check the work phone number, and I do get the work email. I'd love to hear from you. So, questions about the open meeting law, about any other topics, suggestions for future training topics, and Margot's got the evaluation situation under control.
Yes, I
I'll
just
stop
want
talking.
to, before we get into questions, I just want to point out that I did put in the Zoom group chat a link to the survey, and we would appreciate, before you have a chance, before you leave this evening, if you had a few moments just to fill that out. Just gives us some information about this evening's presentation, but also, most importantly, we would love feedback on future planning topics. That would be very helpful. Today's was a very basic overview. It covered a lot of information. There's more specific topics that can be done. So please suggest away, and we'd be happy to receive any feedback from tonight. Looks like we maybe have a couple questions. So, all right. There is a question on the table of, will there be a follow-on presentation with more information and details about the actual planning process?
Who asked that? Or I'd
That
just
was-
like a little more.
Oh, sorry, that was Tabby Friedman from Dover.
We'd obviously be very happy to do follow-on. It would be helpful to know more detail about what it is you're looking for. I think I've said it once at least, but don't consider this your last bite at the apple. If you have questions, by all means, follow up by email or phone. We absolutely intend to try to do more, and I think it would be very useful to have a narrower focus. Several sessions with each one having a narrower focus, then we can spend more time exploring the weeds.
Tabby Friedman wrote that she would appreciate that. This was a good basic overview, but she's looking for more in-depth guts.
Well, we'll try to reach out to her.
We also had a question from Jethro Eaton. The question says, we're not currently meeting. He's the vice chair of the Guilford. And we're not currently meeting, so when should we start?
I think just as soon as you can muster critical mass, it would not be a bad idea. Even if it's not a terribly substantive, productive session in terms of moving something, just getting your heads back together, your heads and faces back together if you have video capability. I would certainly encourage it sooner rather than later.
So there was a comment from Maureen and Vance Bell to everyone that just said that the VLCT webinar on open meeting law was very helpful this afternoon. And I believe, John, you said you had a link, and we can try to get that out to everyone as soon as we get a copy of that.
Yep, I'll be very happy to share it. Wished I had discovered it sooner, but I only happened on it today while I was fine-tuning that slide on open meeting law, and I was on their website to see if there's anything new, and lo and behold, in 2 hours there's going to be a webinar. So I signed up and went. Anyway, so any more questions? I gotta say, Dave Culver, I love seeing your smiling face. It's been too long. So, jeepers, I thought we were gonna...
So, John, I'm gonna suggest that we can stay on for a few more minutes. And if anyone has any specific questions that you would like to ask John, he can spend a few minutes answering that. But I just want to remind...
I'm very happy.
I just want to remind everyone about the exit survey that is in the group chat link, if you have a moment to fill that out. And maybe we will end the formal portion of this evening's presentation on basics of town planning. But again, please, there's so many topics that could be delved into in more depth. And we would appreciate hearing some specific feedback about topics that would be really helpful for you or your community that we might be able to provide. So, and you can provide that in the survey link that I sent. And we will be sending up, just a reminder that we will be sending a copy of the slide deck in a follow-up email, as well as maybe some additional links like the VLCT video and things like that. So thank you all for coming, and it's been really great. And we look forward to continuing to work with all of your communities and with you.